Hello and welcome to today's webinar on addressing the privacy paradox, how to balance personalization with data privacy. I'm Megan Winnery, Director of Growth Marketing at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. All right, on to today's presenter. Ted Speakus is the Director of Telium's Solution Consultants organization in North America and Latin America. He has over 17 years of experience with a number of leading organizations within digital marketing, social platforms, SaaS-based telephony and messaging firms, ITSM portfolios, and automated quality assurance technologies. Prior to joining Telium, Ted worked in a number of senior-level advisory positions for CA and HP, where his focus was centered on lean IT methodologies throughout financial, healthcare, manufacturing, and retail industries. All right, let's get started. Ted, over to you.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining the webinar. Today we'll be talking about a topic that as of 2019 has been making the rounds amongst digital marketing, IT, legal, and security professionals throughout the industry. It's a topic that is sure to be on top of mind throughout 2020 and beyond. This topic concerns two areas of discipline that for the first time have been inextricably linked in the United States, and those areas are privacy regulations and digital marketing technologies. In this webinar, we'll discuss the market forces that have shaped the relationship with each other, resulting in what has been termed the privacy paradox. We'll then discuss how the privacy paradox has affected the traditional affinity we have always observed between people, process, and the technologies that serve them, and delve into a new strategy that Telium is promoting to address a new frontier, something we call the data supply chain. So let's get started. Okay, so let's kick this off with a cartoon. We'll set the stage for the driving theme of this webinar with this cartoon. The new data privacy regulations that are sweeping the globe in response to consumer demand for protections didn't previously exist. We've already seen the emergence of GDPR in Europe, and we're just now getting ready for the introduction of the California Consumer Privacy Act, or the CCPA. But privacy regulations are also prevalent in most other countries throughout the world. Privacy standards are becoming ubiquitous with consumer data exchanges wherever they may occur, both online and offline. And these standards can be viewed as an opposing force to consumer interactions that have always relied on unfettered access to data. So in a sense, the new area of privacy has created a catch-22 for organizations. On one hand, we've gotten used to personalized experiences on websites, like today's consumer, for example, expects true personalization from every business, not just Amazon. On the other hand, we're also demanding reasonable and enforceable data privacy laws because consumers are more conscious than ever of their data privacy. And therein lies the conflict. How do these two stipulations for interactions coexist with each other? How can a business continue to invest in customer experience initiatives that promote the brand and generate revenue, but at the same time avoid frustrating customers with the upcoming boundaries that privacy regulations will insist upon, such as the cartoon lady suddenly going blank and asking why things aren't personalized? These questions make up the definition of what the privacy paradox is. The paradox warns us that there is a potential conflict brewing amongst data and analytics, customer experience, marketing, legal, InfoSec, and ultimately the business itself. It's the first time that all of these groups together have recognized that they have to work together if they want to continue delivering value to the business. So let's take a look at some numbers to really see the evidence of this surfacing paradox. We know from the past few years that personalization is a critical piece of the online experience. Consumers are barraged by thousands of automated ads, thousands of brand options every year. It seems like nowadays a person can't simply browse around the web looking at products without having to endure rapid-fire promotions through display ads or unwanted emails just seconds later. It's happened to all of us. The consumer has justifiably become fickle, and new generations of consumers that have never known what the marketing world was like prior to the information age have now set new standards and expectations for their attention span. It's short, and it's pretty demanding. This is why 80% of consumers are more likely to do business with a company that gets it right. Companies that provide a personalized experience are companies that are customer-centric. Now, that's just not a fancy word. It means that businesses who market with their customers' needs and expectations as the number one priority, not the business's number one priority. That's a big difference. And so they're going to battle for the win for the wallet. In essence, our customer knows that when we have the technology to understand what our tastes and intentions are as consumers, that's what kind of advertising should be used and to what extent. It bears emphasis. Consumers won't trust your brand if your advertising techniques are not modern and intelligent. So the value that this statistic that you see on the screen here right now places on the personalized experience really reveals an expectation for today's marketing organizations, not a nice to have. 80% of our consumers are more likely to do business with any company if there's a personalized experience involved. And the paradox is clearly seen when you look at the statistic on the right. While 80% of consumers demand personalization, basically every single person in the world, 97%, are telling us that data protection is something that we are absolutely concerned about. So personalization is based upon data, and not just the typical clickstream data that we've all come to accept as being open for business. We're talking about behavioral data and historical data that businesses are mining to produce accurate guesses on current and future behavior. The marketing outcomes that truly differentiate a brand are based on a vast amount of consumer data that businesses need to fulfill the promise of personalization. Without access to that data, the brand will be in an ordeal of constant risk in alienating their prospects. However, if an organization can provide relevant experiences for consumers while still respecting their privacy, customers value them more. So that's not a shocking statistic here. Research by Accenture shows that 88% of consumers say that companies that provide personalized experiences without compromising their trust are more appealing and can relate to their needs better than others. That should ring the bells for your brand recognition. So this is good because a 2018 McKinsey study called Personalizing at Scale claims that personalization of consumer experiences will deliver a 10% lift in sales and a 5 to 8 times improvement in ROI on that marketing spend used. So there's the rationale that we need to request more budget and where it's going to go. This is the goal. This is how we need to address the privacy paradox. Ultimately, we need to do both. We need to appeal to people's privacy demands as well as their personalization needs. So the paradox we have to deal with goes beyond the familiar suspects of e-commerce. What about organizations that were already highly averse to data collection and usage? I'm talking about the financial and healthcare organizations that we've all come to know and love, who, while not necessarily trying to sell you a product every single day like some e-commerce companies do, still are businesses that absolutely value the power of knowing their members, their patients, and it can be argued that the stakes are much higher for these companies than they are for e-commerce. These types of businesses have been operating in a highly regulated industry for decades. They are risk averse, and as well they should be. HIPAA and GLBA privacy regulations have set the bar much higher for banks and healthcare because consumer data that they possess is far more sensitive than the typical clickstream intention insights that e-commerce companies analyze. Financial and healthcare organizations have operated under the specter of large fines looming over any non-compliance with the regulations that they're beholden to, and they have understandably become highly skeptical of using personal data for marketing reasons in light of the ramifications of any exposure of that personal data. So as a result, these types of organizations have grown comfortable with using aggregated data or anonymized data. It's the safer approach for them. But there is a price to pay for that safety. Anonymized data can only take a business so far when it comes to personalization. And so while we can learn valuable lessons from financial and healthcare industries in their disciplined practices, we can also clearly see the limitations that we would be burdened with should our marketing strategy have to endure the same conservative approach to data usage. So what has financial and healthcare verticals taught us? That it's essential for all organizations to properly classify data and govern it differently. That it's absolutely critical to have the ability to detect, mitigate, and manage the risk associated with sharing all types of data. First-party, second-party, and third-party data must be managed and orchestrated throughout a business's strategic marketing plans and technology environment appropriately. The businesses that cannot accomplish this required governance will bear the risk of existing in a restrictive environment that will work against their revenue generation and brand enhancement goals because they will only feel comfortable using non-personal data. Yet, a significant number of organizations currently are choosing to go this non-personal route, and Gartner tells us why. This will come as no surprise to you guys. Number one, the privacy regulations in place today have a lot of unknowns surrounding a business's obligations. We all get it. I've read the CCPA Act, many of you have too. I still don't understand what form factor is absolutely required, and I still don't understand a dozen or so different questions or what ifs. If you ask 10 lawyers the same question about what data is okay to collect in a CCPA environment and what isn't, you're pretty likely to get at least a half dozen different answers. Number two, and this is even more concerning, Gartner's study surfaced many organizations who didn't feel like their brand had made enough headway within their relationship with customers, that it bore any rationale to actually personalize the experience with them in this manner. So that's saying a lot. In other words, marketing and business leaders in some markets took an honest look at themselves and said, we don't think it makes sense to personalize quite yet. Let's wait till we learn more about our customers. That is a profound statement because they're fully admitting that they don't have the right data in place to actually invest in personalization yet. They realize that data comes first before the technology. So all of this analysis points to the same conclusion. We need to figure out how we are going to use customer data. It used to be that the traditional 4 Ps of marketing, product, price, promotion, and placement, were the focus areas for marketing departments, but things have changed in the modern era of smartphones and ubiquitous connectivity. The internet has minimized the control that businesses have over price and product. Now promotion and placement are what the key areas of differentiation are. So personalization encompasses both of those aspects. In this era of new mass awareness and the requirement for rapid interaction in real time, we have to deal with the privacy paradox. We can't just observe it. So while we understand that personalization is the way forward, it is actually the means in which a business is collecting and governing customer data that will become the most important strategic differentiator in today's hyper-competitive markets. Let's explore how businesses can get started in doing that. We can start the process of understanding what we need to do through the same lens of a familiar structure. We've all heard it before: people, process, and technology. The answer lies, as often it does with solving complex customer data issues, with focusing your efforts on the people inside your organization, the strategy that you're building, and the technology that is enabling both of those. All 3 of these practices and disciplines intersect each other to address the privacy paradox and solve the resistance between personalization and data protection. Your company likely has a mission statement and a set of core values for employees to rally around. Trusted on the data specifically, should be one of those everyday missives. Get all of your teams, from IT to marketing to InfoSec to legal, on board with your company's stance and messaging around your customers' data and its security from day one. This is a core requirement for people. If trust hasn't previously been a messaging priority, identify internal leaders who can act as counsel of data stewards, including security, architecture management, database operations management, data warehousing, business intelligence management. Also, host internal trainings as needed, especially when it comes to CCPA and GDPR. These are obligations of the business, as the legislation has put it. Their outcome is an organization that trusts the data infrastructure and personnel, and they're always in lockstep with privacy mandates and the latest technologies. Like a strategy to unify siloed data, a company-wide plan to ensure customer data protection and trust of that data throughout your personnel will keep your team on the same page while rallying support. Now, from a strategic perspective, security by design should become a mandate for all digital personalization initiatives, if it isn't already. Right from the get-go, a business should be thinking about customer-centric strategies that promote transparent data collection practices that customers have come to expect, not a nice-to-have. Any digital marketing technologies that play a role in this kind of a strategy should also be prominently featured on the brand's privacy policy page, explained in clear English and easily accessible by a consumer under his or her own power to either enable or disable. That means that your strategy must treat technologies as independent components that could dynamically be added or subtracted from your marketing stack. We're talking about an agnostic architecture that is completely flexible. So you should be planning for a marketing stack that is capable of pivoting on dynamic consumer guidance in real time. Gone are the days of all or none, or one marketing stack to deliver every single initiative. It does not work. A strategy reliant on the old ways of governing data will not survive the demands of the paradox. Today's modern strategy must manage consumer data independently from the marketing technology it fuels. That bears repeating. You must manage consumer data independently from the marketing technology that it fuels. The agility that this kind of an architecture will provide is important to establish right from the very beginning. The first strategic question to ask is, how do we collect, govern, and orchestrate our data securely and in real time? Only then should the strategy ask, secondly, what technologies will activate that data once we know that we need to, so we can personalize the experience? Data first, then the marketing technologies. And that brings us to the technology portion of the diagram, the fun stuff that we all like. The paradox requires that the technologies you choose should take security and compliance as seriously as you do. So look for technologies that are aligned accordingly with your industry. Privacy certifications like HIPAA, PCI, SOC 2 Type 2, the Privacy Shield framework, ISO, and other best-in-class security and privacy controls are all in scope here. Also ask your vendors if they'll sign a BAA, and if they offer a private cloud, a single-tenant model, should your organization demand it. Technology vendors that can adhere to these security requirements while at the same time fulfill the need to allow customer data to move freely throughout the environment, yet securely, in a controlled and auditable and orchestrated fashion, will be the technology choices of the future with absolutely no exception. The Wild West days are gone. Now that we know how people, process, and technology will impact our strategy, let's take a look at what most companies are dealing with before we end off with what we think here at Telium is the solution. Most enterprises today look something like this. There's a bunch of customers interacting with a brand on a number of touch points and in a number of different contexts. There's multiple devices like web browsers, smartphones. IoT devices are about to become all the rage when 5G gets introduced. But ads and third-party platforms like social media and ad networks also offer gateways to engagement. Let's not forget that. We click on an ad, we get brought to the site. That is a portal to our brand. In addition, other systems in other contexts, such as help desks and offline data that have been collected in non-digital venues, also represent a customer touchpoint. All of these engagement points are purpose-built to engage with the business directly, and that makes sense. A customer talking to a help desk will quite logically have his or her data involved with that engagement saved in a CRM or a customer service platform. It's just the same as if a customer engaged with a brand on an app can expect their data to reside in that app's siloed database and eventually make its way over to the data warehouse. And that, in effect, shows the current state of how customer data is collected, analyzed, enriched, and eventually moved around to other people and other technology destinations that can gain some value with it. But that's the problem. Collecting data and shuttling it around from business silo to business silo introduces risk to the business. And ultimately, that's what businesses are looking to solve right now. Risk can be quantified in real dollars if you want to do it. It all comes down to cost and time. Doing things to silos, as well as we know from past history, can be very efficient if all you care about is the silo's operation. So nothing wrong with it in some contexts. But in today's world where privacy regulations demand that all silos use the customer's data appropriately, the risk associated with using another silo's data is far too great to make this current approach worth it. So we need to change. This is where the paradox emerges as a barrier to business. This is where you'll see resistance. The privacy paradox prevents a business from providing a unified, personalized experience to its customers on any channel of engagement, whether it's marketing, services, or otherwise, because the business has siloed efficiencies that they need to be incentivized to let go of. Something has to come along that removes the risk of changing the way businesses optimize the results and subsequently measure their success. So for example, consider the digital marketing business unit. Continuing to operate in a siloed fashion and not taking advantage of other units' engagements with customers will undoubtedly result in wasted ad spend. We see this all the time. The social marketing platform might have a good crack team of people that are doing things right. I wish the email retargeting team had the same kind of knowledge. Whether or not marketing is retargeting a customer with email or social or personalizing the experience, There's literally 7,000 different technologies that we can use to do this in the ecosystem. The paradox forces it to keep data to itself. And as a result, there are lost insights that could have been gained from the CRM or even the analytics team. And the business suffers from wasted ad spend. We all suffer from this. We're all trying to move past it. Then there is the Enterprise Data Warehouse Division. This has been around for a long time. It's got a great discipline involved in it. Its job is to maintain a single source of truth for customers. Sound familiar? So the EDW is not something that can engage with other business unit technologies in real time. It's meant to be a storage of data. Its primary purpose is to ensure the integrity of the data it receives. It's not meant to integrate or act as a supply chain in real time. So as a result, the paradox's impact is really evident here. Assembling data from every business unit, cleansing it, ETLing it, all of that takes maintenance and it takes time. So having one business unit trying to take advantage of the EDW's data insights will result in some skepticism of the data integrity at the moment of collection. For example, how does the marketing team know that the EDW has the most up-to-date copy of customer data? I've talked to a lot of customers in the past 5 years. Most of them say it doesn't. It's great that the data has privacy consent guaranteed. How old is this? Is it still useful? Is it still legit? This is now a legal question. This isn't something that's nice to have. We really need to know what the consent is, what the opt-out parameters are before we use our marketing technologies. It has to be orchestrated. It can't just live somewhere. What has the customer done since their data set was finally loaded into storage? This is the time gap in between ETLing something in a massive data warehouse and actually using the data. It used to be that we could go a day or two and then move on. The data is probably as accurate as it will be. Not anymore. Real-time is not just a slick thing to have so that you can bring up pop-ups. Real-time ensures integrity, and that bears repeating. Real-time orchestration ensures the integrity of the data. It's a mandatory element of your data infrastructure now. So there's significant risk that this data, while it's valid and safe, no disputing that in the EDW, has probably lost its value to other parts of the business who need to engage that data in real time. That carries over to the analytics team, who undoubtedly use the EDW as their single source of truth. Sometimes it's a data lake, sometimes it's an EDW, or something even associated to those things. They take more time, cost, and effort to assemble that data. In other words, not saying that you can't run analytics off your data lake. You can. You will spend more if you're not managing data independently from that architecture, however. Data lakes, once again, were not built to orchestrate data in real time to EDWs and analytics tools and marketing and legal and so forth. They're there so developers and engineers can go into the lake and build data sets that make sense for their particular goal. So the analytics team has been put in a tough position by the privacy paradox, because they're always going to be a few steps behind the current state of the customer, since by definition, the data that they are building insights upon can be days or even weeks old. The risk that the data in the analytics department is either stale or duplicate is significant, because customer data has flown into this EDW silo by silo, potentially overwriting each other or simply being out of date. And since each silo keeps identity data local to their technology, there is no comparative process in place where the warehouse or the analytics tool can detect that two customer data sets from two different silos are actually the same customer. There needs to be a broker in the middle that reconciles identity so that the same person doesn't get counted as two independent people. Every business endures this problem to some degree, but those that lean towards privacy over personalization are really going to appreciate the extent in which data can become stale and duplicate much more than others. Many organizations look at the CRM as the single source of truth because the CRM has so many contextual views of the customer. The CRM has demographic data, transactional data, and oftentimes service-related data associated with a call center or a support desk that is very relevant to understanding the customer in the hopes of ultimately personalizing the experience for them. Now, the CRM does better than most in balancing the paradox's challenge of complying with privacy regulations while having a decent depth to the customer's data set. But there's one problem. A CRM is not meant to be a real-time integrating hub of customer data for the business. A CRM is meant to be a platform in which the business can use data analysis for historical insights into customer interaction, make decisions about how to move forward to expand the relationship strategically. CRMs do not interact with customers in real time. They do not personalize the experience. They contribute to that. So the paradox's effect in using a CRM for this purpose will inevitably be a slow response. And in today's world, where customers want engagement to be in real time, and the business needs it in real time, and they need it to be 100% accurate, it's quite clear that the CRM serves as a critical source of data, but the risk of using it as the single source of truth to engage with customers in a world demanding privacy and personalization at the same time will lead to disappointment. And that brings us to the future, machine learning. Everybody's talking about it. ML platforms and data scientists are keenly aware of the value of accurate, reconciled, and ready-to-use data. You ask those data scientists how important data is to them, you will get a long, long answer. Their models depend on data of the highest integrity and the fastest production rates. ML projects already take up a lot of time to train their models with cleansed data that has been governed appropriately from the beginning and audited for privacy, consent, and context. Data scientists spend over 75% of their time chasing data around the silos you see here, which is a term that is appropriately called data wrangling, because that data is always in motion, always changing, and requires constant privacy checks and contextual validation in this siloed environment. So at the end of the day, machine learning is probably the one technology place, the one technology initiative that will change the game for personalization in the most positive manner. That's why most businesses have got at least one ML project on the go, and many in the industry are further along with legitimate data science divisions. These investments beget more investments into data. It must be accurate, it must have privacy consent, it must have integrity and depth, and most importantly, there needs to be a lot of it. ML initiatives require so much data that managing the ML platforms is simply not possible to do manually. This is where humans step aside and computers run it. Automation must play a role here. That automation has to guarantee that the privacy paradox is satisfied in real time. Meaning, no data gets into this model unless it is associated with the goal of the ML project and is proven to have consent. To get that kind of data fidelity from 6, 7, 8 different silos of business is not feasible nor practical. It will take too long and be far too onerous. You are wasting the salary of the data scientist by making him or her run around the place and put that stuff together. It is far more likely that the data scientists will be forced to accept the data from one or two places and take ownership of cleansing it themselves. They'll go as far as that. And going down that route will reduce the legitimacy of the ML model's effectiveness and risk the quality of the results. For example, overfitting is a constant reminder that we're being biased in collecting data. Bias happens when you go to one or two silos instead of looking at the customer as a whole throughout the enterprise. So data scientists expect that their data sources are legit, and they expect that the business has led them to the right areas for inspection. The last thing a data scientist wants to hear is that they should be spending their time on validating that a source of data is legitimate. That is the kind of thing that should already be established. We have the technology to do this. But we see in the privacy paradox that silos form, and that ultimately results in data scientists not getting the full story. Customer data lives everywhere, and the ML initiative, out of all the other business units that you've seen on this slide right now, really exposes the problem with that. So if we let that paradox persist, the result for ML stakeholders is that they are forced to spend most of their time collecting data everywhere that it lives and spending way too much time data wrangling. So it is the future technologies like machine learning that stand the most to lose from a business that has fallen victim to the privacy paradox. Now that we know what the risks are, let's conclude with the solution that Telium and hundreds of businesses and brands worldwide agree is the solution. You need a data supply chain. What's the definition of a data supply chain? A data supply chain is a transparent, accessible, and controlled technology platform that serves as the foundation on which data governance practices are implemented to comply with privacy regulations, and fulfill business goals. That's a direct target for the privacy paradox. This governance takes place in the oversight of enterprise-class security techniques meant to address these regulations. The data supply chain technology simplifies and unifies a siloed environment because the chain works as a common backbone to the other technologies that need customer data orchestrated to them in real time. Orchestration is an important word here. Why did we just say integrated or moved? Because orchestration implies that data movement from one place to another has a consistent set of rules applied to it to enforce the trust that business has in this data and manage that data in real time to ensure full quality. So there's a big difference in that word, orchestration, as opposed to integration. It means a lot more. Governance and automation techniques are obviously important, but we can claim to govern data in a spreadsheet if we really wanted to prove a point. This is why it's important to define a data supply chain with the word automation. We don't just mean some of it is automated. We mean the entire data lifecycle from the moment that data is first detected on a user's device to the moment that it is activated on some kind of an ad network or some kind of technology tool. That's the data supply chain. That's the scope of automation. Automation is a critical element in changing anything because automation typically represents an improvement in productivity. And solving the privacy paradox demands productivity be considered. The amount of effort that it would take to check every single customer data set for compliance each and every time you wanted to use that data or simply enrich it with new information is enormous and impractical. This is a job for computing, and that's why there can be no doubt that the data supply chain must be a tool that is fully automated. So let's see what a single platform that provides governance, automation, orchestration, and security does to an organization that decided to move away from a troublesome customer data environment like the kind that we are seeing here to a new centralized architecture that can meet the demands of the paradox. As you can see, instead of having every customer touchpoint connect to one or more business units independently for processing, we're establishing a shared platform for all businesses to request a customer data set from. This architecture of removing silos and instead mandating that all digital marketing and IT entities come to a single shared platform for their data is perhaps the most impactful move an organization can make. So this architecture that you see from left to right is what we call the data supply chain. Let's walk through each of the three phases of value that a data supply chain will deliver once designed properly. In the first phase of data collection, two things are happening here. Number one, a set of standard technologies are implemented to collect data from every device and touch point that customers are interacting with the business upon. Some of you might be thinking, wow, that's a big task. You have to go through it anyway. You have to bring out a data inventory and literally write down every touch point that customers are engaging with your brand with to comply with the upcoming privacy regulations, which are literally less than a month away from going public. So you can see that this graphic emphasizes this with mobile phone icons, website icons, spreadsheets, systems, you name it. They're all there, cloud systems, ad networks. It doesn't matter what kind of device the originating source of data is. If a customer's data is on that device or touch point, you care about it. The data supply chain's collection technology needs to be able to detect it. This is the first link of the data supply chain, so to speak. This is where data is first surfaced by customers and then captured. So your data supply chain technology that is automated has to include collection technologies. Now the second thing that happens here involves that the automated governance that the data supply chain has built into it. Because data comes in all forms and states on these devices, it is always going to be in need of cleansing, pre-processing, and some kind of standardization. You will find that you have to do this sometimes on the client side, like actually on the device, and sometimes it's okay to pipe it over to the server side. You need both. You need an event data framework that encapsulates both client and server-side data processing. The idea here is to have a step that transforms that data in real time to a standard consumable format that the central hub that you see in the middle of this diagram can actually deal with and understand seamlessly. That means don't just pipe stuff into a database and pick up from the database and away we go. That introduces manual processes. The automation needs to flow. This standardization check, therefore, is part of the automation aspect of the data supply chain. It is built into it. The chain is configured to interpret customer data being produced and immediately understand how the business will consume that data. So these are the first two links in the chain. Collecting data from all devices and touch points, and then filtering that data through a universally accessible data standard that represents what data is needed for the rest of the chain. And that includes privacy data signals, preferences from the consumer, whether it's an opt-out from an American user or an explicit opt-in from a European user. It's just data. It's the same type of data, and that's what that lock represents on this diagram. We call a timeout, and we ask if the right data is in place. That's part of the standard. In the second phase of the data supply chain, the stage that is called transform and enrich, this is where all the fun starts. This is where we'll see automation really step up and do things that you haven't seen before, primarily in the areas of data enrichment and data orchestration. As data is collected from every device that you see on the left that consumers are using, that data is useful in its raw format for certain technologies like performance monitoring tools, analytics tools. These are the tools that measure the volume and basic click streams of the user. And in many cases, digital marketing technologies that need individual data values to somehow deliver value to the business. Okay, that's event data, and we can deal with it on the left-hand side. We use tags historically to do that. But that event data is also useful for another type of technology provider, a new one, and that is called a customer data platform, or a CDP. That big white circle you see in the middle is a CDP. The CDP's job is to integrate with every source of event data that customers interact with on the left and form deep, detailed customer profiles that are constantly updated in real time. There is no hesitation. This updating of the customer profile is what we call enrichment, and it has to be automated. For example, a customer profile can first form based on critical identity data, such as a username or an email. And then as that customer identifies themselves on different devices, their data set is enriched with iPhone screen swipes, product selections from a browser that is calculating favorite brands, lifetime values of purchases that came from historical visits, and so forth and so on. All of this data is secured according to industry standards and persisted appropriately to serve privacy platforms that need to have the most up-to-date customer profile and state for data subject access requests. So if we were to stop right here in this circle that the CDP represents, we'd have a pretty good solution. We'd have a customer profile data source that is being constantly fueled by every single device that the consumer uses and every single system that has consumer data. You've accomplished a lot just by coming to this point in the data supply chain. You see all these pipelines that are coming in from the left, but look at the ones that are going south into three more areas: the data warehouse, the data lake, and the machine learning training model platform. Synchronizing those customer profiles that you are automating in real time with these three IT environments represents a huge ROI uplift, because each of these departments were spending vast amounts of financial and human capital to do the same thing before the CDP existed. Now that the CDP has automated this whole process without any additional cost to these departments, how can they say no to integrating with it? It doesn't stop right here, though. The data supply chain has a third phase. In this third and final phase of our new data supply chain architecture, we close the loop, so to speak, by wrapping a number of real-time API interfaces around this CDP. So those APIs represent extended links of this chain. Think of dozens of links sprouting off from a chain backbone, where the incoming data sets on the left from all those devices are checked against a series of criteria, and as a result of that criteria being fulfilled, are moved to other technology destinations on the right. They do that in the form of audiences. We segment it and prep the data. You can consider the CDP as your official staging ground for activating data in real time, and you can pre-configure it to do so. Gone are the days where we fire hose a bunch of data into some warehouse or some database and send an email to Sally and say, go for it. Go mine your data and send a bunch of emails. Now Sally wakes up in the morning, turns on her email retargeting server, there's her data. She never has to worry about that again. So for example, a user that just spent her $1,000th with an e-commerce website would have this purchase captured on the first link of the chain on the left. Then the CDP detects that because of the $1,000 threshold being achieved, it needs to move that consumer's data set into a brand new audience meant for high-value customers, for example. That audience is then in turn linked to that email server that Sally's running for a retargeting marketing campaign, while at the same time, that data set is placed into a new audience for an SEM initiative that automatically raises the bid price for this customer's high-value search. They're doing it at the same time. They're looking at the same data. You've solved a massive problem by centralizing and using a hub-spoke model in this universal data hub that resides in this data supply chain. So this kind of automation links the integration phase with the activation phase. These are two separate things. A basic technology moves data from one database to another, that's fine, but it doesn't trigger or cause actions to take place on that other technology. That's the difference between integration and activation. Activation means that the data that has been moved actually triggers an action on the receiving end. Activation requires that the originating technology has to be intelligent and be aware of how the receiving technology works. So a good CDP will include many ways to activate data as opposed to just integrating it. Look for that in your CDP. This represents the vision that Telium has for the new data supply chain architecture. Telium believes that having a customer data platform is a good first step, but it is not enough. When we consider the impact of the privacy paradox, we can see that only a data supply chain from end to end will address the barriers that the paradox represents. Visually configurable technologies that collect, standardize, transform, integrate, and ultimately activate customer data in real time will become a mandatory piece of the technology environment, not just a nice to have, in order to solve the privacy paradox. And that is why many businesses have already begun investing in these data supply chains and moving forward in delivering both personalization balanced with privacy at the same time. So with that, we'll come to the end and we'll take some Q&A, Megan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ted. Please submit any questions that you have in the chat panel, and we will start taking them. All right, first question. Given GDPR requirements for consent, purpose specification, and storage limitations, it's hard to imagine how any affected company can maintain a data lake about consumers' personal data, no?
I would totally agree with that. I think the data warehouse itself being a stateful repository, which is meant and has a bunch of controls in place throughout the ETL, is a better repository for customer data at state for persistence. A data lake, on the other hand, is meant to be agile and flexible. It was first introduced to the IT community as an alternative for having to use the data warehouse for extraction. Instead, the data lake would receive unstructured or semi-structured data from dozens of different sources, and the engineers had a free-for-all where they could build different data sets that would work with different marketing or legal or IT technologies. However, using that data, there are some exemptions in the CCPA. You can use data for QA and debugging. Your purpose has to be justly stated. The data needs to have a meta layer around it to make its continued propagation into data lakes legit. But yes, I personally, this is a personal opinion, see the amount of customer data entering the data lake as decreasing in light of security concerns, or alternatively, having really well-governed and structured processes, i.e. a CDP as part of the data supply chain that cleanses and proves that data as legit for the data lake first. I think, personally, that data lake processes are going to change, and they're going to change very quickly in terms of procurement. Everything else can remain the same, how you use the data, et cetera, et cetera. But how they get the data undoubtedly needs to change.
Great, thanks so much. All right, next question. Do you see more consumers leaning towards privacy-centric brands over the next few years, especially as consumers become more privacy conscious?
Yes, that's a great question. Again, I really like this because in the last 4 years, I've been meeting with more lawyers than I ever have in my life. And it's fun because being in the industry for over 20 years, I have never come into a situation where legal advice is needed to create and design and fulfill requirements. It's always been up to myself or my team or a business leader. But now we need legal advice. These privacy regulations impact the very data that we're using, the very reason that we're building applications and middleware. It's no longer about the application. It's no longer about the fastest technology. First and foremost on the list is privacy. It's changed everything. And so I think it's going to be the very first requirement that comes up anytime you pick a technology. We've seen that in Europe. Since the GDPR came into place, I read a stat that said something like north of half of the businesses still are not compliant with GDPR. That's astounding to me. I've also seen in the news that several digital marketing technologies have exited from the European markets because they don't believe they have a future in there unless they shore up their privacy implementation. And I don't blame them. They're avoiding a lawsuit, and basically their legal staff said, you can continue staying in Europe and making X million dollars a year and then potentially get sued for X million dollars a year. What's the point? Fix up your technology first, comply with privacy, and then go to market with your product. That to me says privacy comes first when I see businesses exiting from the GDPR market. I think it's going to happen in the United States, not so much. I think the CCPA is far more stringent on what constitutes personal information than the GDPR is, but I also think the CCPA has many more exceptions to the usage of data that we're going to see in the next couple of years through case study law that simply has no answer to date. So there's a lot of what ifs, but one thing's for sure. Single tenant models of cloud are going to be very important. Signing a BAA with your vendor and recognizing them as a service provider as opposed to a third-party provider is going to be critical, and getting contractual law into place. And then actually having a technology that can automate security, governance, and data integration / activation is going to be mandatory. Doing the lily pad by lily pad data leap throughout the organization, you will not be in real time. You will not solve the paradox. You have to respond in milliseconds, and the technology that you use to secure according to privacy laws has to be agile enough to do that. That means separating data from the application from an architectural perspective. Two different people running two things that are absolutely reliant upon each other. I see the rise of the chief data officer and his or her organization as a result of that.
Makes sense. All right, next question. Our organization needs to stay compliant with HIPAA and is especially data privacy focused. What are your suggestions for maintaining this privacy versus personalization balance in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, great question. This goes back to the slide where we talked about healthcare and financial verticals and the organizations that have been dealing with privacy constructs for decades. If any of you on the phone have had the good fortune of working with healthcare companies, for example, you've known that they've been in a state of transformation for many, many years. They realize that they've got to go digital, but the process is very, very slow because the data that they're working with is extremely sensitive. It doesn't get any more sensitive than the kind of data that HIPAA laws encompass. So what is the solution here? The solution is technology has caught up with these restrictions in the last little while. It used to be the case that a SaaS provider for anything, whether it's data or some kind of digital marketing tool, would be heavily scrutinized by a organization that was bound to HIPAA or GLBA laws if you're in the financial industry, but no longer. These SaaS providers, many of them, including Telium, have moved towards a single tenant model to satisfy those privacy requirements that go beyond CCPA and GDPR. Right? How we manage consumer data or patient data is completely different than how we personalize them. Two different disciplines, so to speak. And so a single tenant model with built-in encryption algorithms and hashing mechanisms and orchestration mechanisms that guarantee 100% that personal information, PI, goes to different technologies on a need-to-know basis that is auditable and traceable is the solution. That's a mouthful, and that used to be 2 or 3 technologies that work together. Those technologies in the last 2-3 years have merged into a data supply chain. And the best ones are the ones that just focus on the data. That is what will give you the trust that the technology you are buying cares about the data. If you have a data supply chain that's also shooting emails left, right, and center to different people that's trying to take over your marketing stack, you know the priority of that data supply chain is not integral to data. It's about getting ROI from marketing. We believe here at Telium that data in and of itself is a discipline and should be managed by an independent organization composed of legal staff, InfoSec, a chief data officer, in some shape, manner, or form. We realize that many companies in HIPAA and GLBA and financial, they have the resources to do that, but many companies don't. So we need to have a solution that brings every company in the world up to speed with what the paradox demands of it. Personalization and privacy dealt with at precisely the same time requires data to be independent from the application.
Great. All right, next question. I work for a nonprofit organization with lots of data on volunteers as well as the people we advocate for. Is this the right solution for nonprofits, or should we be using something far less sophisticated? We're competing for attention against for-profit businesses and need to make the right move.
Wow, so I'm looking at that, and I've worked with a lot of customers in the last 5 years with Telium, where nonprofits are buying our technology. And quite honestly, some buy them, some don't, for exactly the reason that this question states. Are we sophisticated enough to require data to be independent from the platform? Normally, I would say, of course you are, because the fact that you are running a business that is required to be under CCPA and GDPR, that means you're sophisticated enough. But the adjective nonprofit is an exemption to that. Nonprofits are exempt from CCPA. The data they collect do not have to request opt-out for the sale of data in that case. So you have different laws that apply to your business model. Now, you can walk off with that answer to the question and say, I don't need to comply with CCPA. And it's true, you can do that. But are you being competitive is the question that only you can answer. When you say, is this the right solution for nonprofits? Because we're competing for attention against for-profits, the competitive nature in me says, step up and fight the for-profit businesses for those eyeballs. And to do that, you still need a data supply chain, because the data supply chain, while you may not necessarily use it for privacy purposes, sure as heck gives you the ability to agnostically switch to low-cost alternatives instead of these multi-million-dollar marketing stacks that demand that you buy every single thing in their portfolio and hire hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of consultants to get you going. You don't need all that. If you're not sophisticated, you can hire a local agency that runs a data supply chain like Telium, and you can drag and drop any technology, whether it's freeware, whether it's open source, or whether it's commercial off the shelf. So a data supply chain has ROI in nonprofit and less sophisticated companies as well as the big boys. And Telium's customer portfolio proves that. We've got Fortune 50 companies working with us, and we've got companies that sell saddles for horses working for us as well. So it goes from mom and pop shops all the way up to the biggest companies you've heard of. Everybody needs a universal data hub within a data supply chain.
Great. Thanks so much, Ted. All right, we have time for one more question. What are your suggestions for maintaining agility with new ever-changing data privacy regulations like CCPA and others to come like it in the future?
Great question. It speaks to agility. And when we think of agility, we think of athletes running around and pole vaulting themselves over stuff. That's true. But agility also comes in the form of data orchestration. When I think of agility, I think of orchestration. It's a fancy term, and I brought it up in this webinar. It doesn't mean having a technology that detects data and piping it over to a database. You don't need to buy anything to do that. You already have that. You can probably get an engineer to do that for you in a week or less. So don't invest in technologies that simply move data. Orchestration is the intelligent form of moving data. That means that, hey, since I'm telling this technology to detect the data, why stop there? Why not understand why we're collecting it, what we need to do with it, and where it needs to go, all in one fell swoop? That is orchestration. That is the biggest difference, and it bears repeating. Integration is not activation. They're two different things. A data supply chain detects data at the source, cleanses it in a millisecond later, has a pre-configured rule that says, by the way, data supply chain, this is why you collected this data. It needs to go to X, Y, and Z, and then moves it to X, Y, and Z with the final step of saying X, Y, Z, activate. Do what you want to do with this data. And oftentimes, that data is moving to an ad network, is the basis for an email retargeting to be sent, has completely changed the real-time bidding foundation on Google AdWords or something like that in your SEM strategy, automatically changes your bid price based on the enriched quality of the data you just collected and transformed. You're basically automating manual human processes like we have been doing since the beginning of time, since the industrial age. We're finding ways to automate what used to be manual, and that's what agility means to me. Agility is no longer building a machine that does the work of 5 human beings. It's building software that used to be the responsibility of 100 human beings to get done within a business process. So we're thinking big time. Data supply chain is the orchestration that results in productivity in areas that human beings could never fathomably do before. That's why machine learning was invented. A human being cannot do what ML algorithms do. And a data supply chain and its agility to feed a machine learning platform is the perfect source for that agility. So that's of course my opinion. I've had it proven through the nearly 1,000 customers that we've worked with in the past few years and the 1,000 more that we expect to do so in the coming years. Great question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ted. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a great day, and we look forward to talking with you soon.